Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. I was gonna post another video today, something like, well, what if we take just the poll collections on Rear Club Politics and throw it into a chart, because it's hard to come up with election commentaries on a Monday when nothing has really happened yet, and you need to put something out. But fortunately, I came across this little article. It was released about 4 days ago. Oh, October the 9th, yep. Called Trump's Path to Victory, with a nod to Washington State. And can I just say, it is one of the most insane things I've read based on how it's attempting to predict an election. And this really, it just lets me tear apart so many things about bad election prediction hot takes, especially with the sort of, no, Trump can still win. He can still win. Like, remember back in 2016 when everyone was accusing Sanders supporters of doing Bernie math? We're now having people do Trump math, attempting to prove, oh, he's super gonna win. He just needs to do this, and this. And if you look over here, they say Kansas always predicts who wins the Democratic primary, and Bernie won Kansas. He says, acting like he wasn't, one of those people. Oops. I learned from my mistakes, though, and now I'm here. And I think I've improved. But anyway, let's tear this thing apart. So, this guy is Sean Trende. He is the senior political analyst, was it? Let's scroll down to the bottom. Yes, we get plenty of charts with this one. He is the senior elections analyst. Okay, for Real Clear Politics. So, he claims to be a guy who knows what he's talking about. So, because it's real RCP, we'll stick with that. Trump, he posted this question: if Trump wins, what should we have paid attention to that would have allowed us to see it coming? The simple answer, you couldn't have. It's like, so, to answer his question, you couldn't have. It's like 2018. In hindsight, if we had known conservative Democrats were going to underperform, most likely due to their vote on the Supreme Court, we can now make a future heuristic from that. But at the time, no one really knew which way it was going to go. Sometimes you are witnessing new data being made live. In 2016, we most likely witnessed what happens if the Democrats run an unpopular candidate, not neutral, unpopular, and the answer is they lose. So the Democrats need to run someone who is at the very least neutral to popular. A good example of popular is Barack Obama. A good example of neutral is, honestly, Joe Biden. Or, I guess, neutral positive would be Joe Biden. But he then goes, we've had so much change. Also, since then, polls have ranged from a mixed USA Today showing Trump tied with Biden in Florida to very bad, CNN showing him down 16 nationally. Apples to oranges there. Already we're looking at a bad comparison. He should be comparing other Florida polls. A trend in Florida does not necessarily match nationally. And an important part here is Biden doesn't need to win Florida. That's not a bad poll for Biden. Trump needs to win Florida. A poll showing him tied with Biden is him barely keeping his head above the water while doggy paddling in the air. Well, if anything showing Biden ahead in Florida is Trump's head going under the water, it would need to be like USA Today Suffolk showing Trump tied with Biden in Pennsylvania, or Michigan, or Wisconsin, the 3 states Biden basically needs to win if we assume the rest of the country is going to go with him. But nope, it had to be Florida, because already a narrative is being presented of, well, Trump's not that bad. He's not that bad. So, obviously, for Trump to win this election, the reality of today has to be closer to the picture painted by the polls, like the USA Today Suffolk poll survey of Florida, than to that of CNN. So, that is a weird sentence to say, because it creates a assumption that certain polls are more valid than other polls. I'm going to say this, and I know I made an entire article, an entire video about how I dislike Trafalgar Group and how I think they're incredibly biased. But even they have important points to give. You can see trends in a group, and it's very telling when, actually, this is very convenient. A group like Trafalgar Group comes out and goes, our poll says Biden's 2 ahead. We're biased to the Republicans. And we say Biden's 2 ahead. It might have even been an internal. You can't just go poll to poll and then have that be everything, especially when you're going national versus state. You need to compare. So national polls are for a national trend. The national trend is against Trump. Florida, compare the USA Today Suffolk poll in Florida with, do we have one that's been pulled up? Yes. This Las Vegas Review-Journal, I can't read. The Florida Atlantic University poll that shows Biden 4 ahead. It would have been that simple. But because he wanted to, one, go for the extremes for the sake of journalism, but also, more importantly, is attempting to create a narrative. If he says, oh, well, Trump's tied in Florida, but the national polls are saying he's down 16%. Man, that seems to be disjointed, as opposed to, well, he's tied, but also Biden seems to have a bit of an advantage. Doesn't work for the narrative he's going to be setting up. Next. There are justifications for believing this possible. In particular, differential response bias can create the appearance of surges in support when bad news hits one side or the other. We should remember that it was almost exactly on this date in 2016 that the Access Hollywood tape dropped. If there had ever been a time that Trump looked to be politically dead, it was then. So, here's what I'm going to say to this. I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt and assume he means in the 2016 campaign. If he means ever, there is so much bias that would immediately be heaped onto this article that I'm just going to ignore it for the sake of fairness. Because coronavirus has been the moment Trump has looked the most politically dead by any stretch of the imagination, with impeachment being a close second. Access Hollywood, didn't move the polls and just reinforced people going, oh, isn't he terrible? Yes, he's terrible. Now on CNN, we're going to show an 18-hour Trump rally. While they smile. It's... Frankly, people didn't take him seriously in 2016 and gave him so much free publicity, but we'll assume he only means 2016. That was probably the moment when he looked the most dead. But also it forgets that there was bad news for Hillary Clinton right before the election in the form of Comey reopening the investigation. That made her look corrupt. That hurt her in the polls. And forgive me if I make a mistake here. I believe differential response bias in this case basically refers to people inherently going, well, I'm against this person or I'm for this person, just based on an immediate news article, and I'm just throwing this one out there almost immediately. Early voting's been happening for a couple of weeks in most states. Over, I believe, now 9 million ballots have been cast. To give you an idea, 20% equivalent to Georgia's voter turnout in 2016 have cast their ballots already. And in many cases, it is people who are either already really not going to vote for Trump, or people who are turning out who are undecided but got a mail-in ballot and just have one thing happen that they're like, I can't vote for him, fill in the ballot, send it in, and it doesn't matter if they change later, they've already made the call. Sorry, I don't mean to be lingering on this part so much, but really we just need to look at all of the stuff before we even go in that indicates that this article's trying to frame a narrative that the election's closer than the polls are saying it is. Okay? That's the narrative we're going into this with. Regardless, the possibility of a Biden blowout and what it would mean for Republicans will be the subject of a forthcoming article. So he's covering himself there of, right now we're talking about good news for Republicans, which is a good way to discuss this. I applaud him for saying we're intentionally ignoring that possibility. For now, here are two indicators of the national environment I've used in analyzing previous elections that, if Trump were to win or barely lose, emphasis on the race being close here, would have been important overlooked indicators. Now we're going to tear these indicators apart. So first one is, as goes Washington, so goes the nation. I won't read through the details, but essentially he makes the argument that the Washington state primary, so statewide primaries, which are jungle primaries, so we're not talking presidential primaries here, we're talking either for senator or governor or both. So keep that in mind. The way jungle primary works, every candidate goes into a single primary: Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Socialist, Green, Independent, the tax is too damn high party. All go into the same primary, and whoever gets the top two votes go to the general election in November. There are a couple states that do this, but it's overall not a bad system. It's not necessarily a good system either, but it does result in moderating effects when it turns into a two single-party primary. Now, what he's done here is he's plotted the Democrat share of the two-party vote in the Washington primary versus the general. He's including midterms here, and I don't know how many elections he's cast, but he's going back a couple of decades here. Because to give you an idea, every 5 dots is a single decade. So we're going back quite a ways here, and his citing is, unless I'm misreading something, of course. So, and this line is not the growth. This is just the midpoint. So if something falls perfectly on the line, it means that the November vote share for the Democrats matched up perfectly with the primary vote share. Now, what he did, so before we go into any of this, he claims that you can explain about 90% of the variation in the Democrats' vote share in the fall by what you see in the late summer. So he's claiming there's a 90% correlation here. So, the data for 2020 was genuinely surprising. I had expected that would look like 2018 when the Democrats won about 62% of the overall vote in the September primary. I'm going to say the primary was actually in August. I did go and double check his numbers here. And there's already some big nitpicks here that can be made. But I'll finish reading this little quote first. Instead, the Democrats' performance this year was slightly worse than in 2016. They won about 55.2% of the vote in 2020 versus 56% of the vote in 2016. Indicating that the Democrats are actually looking like they're going to do worse in 2020. That's not good. But let's just dive deep into this data. So first off, I went into looking at, I believe he used the Senate primary, because when you add up the totals, the Democratic vote share is about 58% until you take everyone who's not a Republican. This includes the Libertarian, the Green, the Socialist, and the Independent candidates. Stuff them all together and you get about 62% of the vote, meaning he's taking people who I would consider not to default to the Democrats, such as Libertarians, and saying they'd vote for them. This is already skewing his data. This means, let's say there's a strong Libertarian challenger in one of these years, and then, so I'm looking for a place where the Democrats are underperforming. Okay, here. So here, Democrats got about 50% of the vote in the primary vote share, and then only got about 42% in the general election. What if there was a Libertarian that got 8% of the vote, and then all those voters went to the Republicans? This is a not stupid generalization. I'm not going to slag on myself that much. A stupidly vast generalization, but it summarizes some of the issues here. Next, they did slightly worse in 2016. This is problematic to me because he's indicating that people were less interested in voting for the governor. So this was for the gubernatorial primary, where in total there were about 250,000 and 245 2,445,000 votes cast total, which, is, and Democrats got about 55% of that vote, which comes out to a decent chunk. But you need to keep in mind that that didn't include the Democratic primary. So, to give you an idea, the Democratic primary in Washington for the presidency was held on Super Tuesday. Sorry, I'm just trying to carefully pick my words here. Was held on Super Tuesday, while the general primary occurred in August. Now, this is supposed to support his vote. He's saying by the end of September, not by the end of September, by the end of August, beginning of September, end of summer, you can predict the vote. Vaguely, with basically most people are secured, which isn't a bad statement. However, when you take the percentage Democrats vote, the amount of people who vote in the Democratic primary, which was just about 1,500,000 people, and you take that over our 245, sorry, I have a little bit of mental dyscalculus, it seems, 2,445,000 people, you end up with the Democrats taking about 62% of the overall vote. Now, is this a little bit apples to oranges? Yes, but it is a big assumption to assume the Democrats are going to lose about 300,000 voters between the Democratic primary and the general election, also indicating that enthusiasm could have been that the high enthusiasm could have been represented in the Democratic primary rather than in the Senate primary. So already, we could be looking at these numbers. It's just a question of when did people turn out, who did people vote for, and all that jazz. And he then follows up with caveat of, well, no, Democrats aren't behind, though. This model still works. They only get about 50% when the Republicans do well. If we use regression analysis, so for those of you who don't know, regression analysis is you literally take a bunch of points of data and you plot a line. In this case, it looks like the line would go about down here. And basically, you use that line for all future predictions. So if our line's going about here-ish, so just north of our main line with a slight dip into the central line up there. So about this way, just eyeballing it. If the Democrats get about 60% of the vote, and we go up to our little line, they're going to get about 65% of the general election vote. So he's saying, based on this, Democrats are projected to do an average of 0.8% better than they did in 2016, which is a little weird. Especially when he's claiming the Democrats did worse by about 0.8%. And then he used error margin, and they says, due to error margins, there's basically no change. Which is a really weird thing to say. And also, I'm just gonna say this right now, Democrats won by 3 million votes in 2016. It's where they win the votes that's important. The national total vote turnout isn't as important as where it is. So, if the Democrats, let's say there is no change in turnout, but they lose 1 million of their votes in California and they go to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, And let's throw Florida in there. Democrats win the presidency with the exact same number of votes. So to associate these two things as being perfect, as being correlated, is not really a good record to be like, oh, well, here's where the Democrats are going to win. And I know this video is dragging on, and I'm really sorry. It's just, this was such a weird article to come across. And he also says, I won't bore you with residual plots. Please bore me with residual plots. I could use residual plots so I can help understand your data better. He's also claiming late intervening events didn't have that much importance on national turnout, which, yeah, but also intervening events almost exclusively hurt the person who loses the race, or is already at a disadvantage, because rarely will you see, like Bush was already hurting in 2008, and it wasn't helping Mitt Romney that he was running, not Mitt Romney, John McCain, that he was running as a Republican with the Bush economy and the war in Iraq on his back. So the fact that the economy just went to total meltdown really was just the shit icing on the crap cake. And in 2016, coronavirus has been going on for a lot longer than last-minute late intervening event. Trump catching it is a last-minute late intervening event. The coronavirus has been going on for months, so, and the economic meltdown didn't occur the first Monday of November. It occurred back in July. So already most of the event had happened. This isn't a definite sign that Trump will win, or Republicans like Representative Jamie Hara Butler can breathe easy, although judging by performances by fellow Rep. Kim Schreider, a Democrat, could be tough for the race. So, yes, but also using primary performance alone is never a good idea for registering how well a person's going to do, especially because most people still don't pay attention to primaries, but do pay attention to general elections. Special election drop-offs is his other one, which is essentially that special elections can be used to, so I actually like his phrase of nerd fights of 2018, which was whether or not you can use a special election to predict a general election. I'm a strong believer in you can use a special election to predict races inside of that specific district, but not nationally. He goes through giving a lot of breakdowns and does some more scatter plots, because these aren't regression analysis, because he doesn't give us the line. But overall, they seem to generally hint at the fact that the Democratic share of a vote in a special election, except in 2015, 2016, underperforms. So in 2017, 2018, Democrats overperformed in the special election in turnout compared to 2016, hinting that they would do well in 2018, 2013, and 2014. They didn't do as well compared to 2012, and Democrats lost some seats in 2014, and the same logic's going on here. Not a bad argument to make that turnout, special elections could predict turnout, but as you can see, there were a lot of special elections that happened in this time, and when we try and predict it here, the information favors the Democrats. But so overall, it's not a bad thing, but we run into the problem of you can't really use special elections because they're located in an isolated part of the country, get noticeably more national attention. So to give you an idea, let's say the Alabama special election. If we use the Alabama special election as an indicator for how 2018 was going to go, It just simply said Democrats were hyped to turn out and don't run a pedophile as a candidate. Not, oh, Democrats are going to win, they're doing so well. And he's right in the term of both of these metrics are what we might call rough heuristics, in the sense of they don't purport to get an exact answer on the edge where the election stands, but that instead give it a sense of the overall state of play. And there are so many things which do that. And this isn't me trying to be like, well, at the end of it, he's kind of right. No, I think you shouldn't use these models as your baseline for whether or not Trump's going to succeed. You need to use polling. You need to use voter turnout. You need to use early voting. You need to use polls. This is based on the idea, oh, well, the polls are wrong, and you can only trust hard voter turnout data. And in many cases, you have correlation implying causation. Like, especially when compared to 2012 to 2016, there is a noticeable, so we can see there's a collection here, but overall 50 to 42, 43%, or 55 to 50 implies about a 3-point negative, but we're not talking this is going to sway a massive election type thing. And especially with the Washington, easily can be explained as correlation implies causation. Just because you can make the points doesn't necessarily mean they work. It's just a case of these are metrics of voter enthusiasm, if anything, not even voter turnout. And so to say, oh, well, this is going to predict the nation, you know what? They're good. If you want to use them as a additional factor in your predictions, that's fine. But, and this is especially for you, the viewer, beware of people trying to sell you cheap solutions like this, especially when it's phrased like those ads you would get, or still can get on certain websites, such as Real Clear Politics. They're like, doctors hate him. He's discovered how to cure heart cancer using only celery and water. It's that type of thing. These are fine metrics. You could make a case for using them. You can't claim they're going to predict a Trump victory, though. So, with that being said, if you like the video, drop a like down below. I'm also curious to hear your opinions on this video and this article. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Otherwise, if you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I do have a Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description. And, as always, and most importantly, have a wonderful day.